What's up everyone, Darcblade here with another Hunter's Guide to Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. In this video, we're going to bring you some full set budget builds, this time for the Insect Glaive. Now what is a full set budget build? Well, it's a build that is constructed from armor from one monster, so it's a full set, but it does use weapons and talismans from different sources of course. All of this is aimed to minimize farming and give you a build that is strong enough to get through the story of Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak and start farming endgame. Now as always, if you find these builds and videos helpful, please consider leaving a like on the video as well as subscribing to the channel, as I try to bring you a variety of builds for a different variety of ways to play. Now when it comes to the Insect Glaive, it's a strong weapon in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Not only is it good at dealing damage, whether it's on the ground or in the air, it also has added survivability thanks to its unique airborne nature, allowing the hunter to stay out of the way of potential attacks. This innate ability to stay airborne means that you don't have to invest too heavily in defensive skills, so the builds featured in this video are mainly DPS builds with quality of life skills. So the first full set budget build I refer to as the Affinity build, or if you want a more colourful name, the Senator build. This build contains the full Senator armor set to give us a high affinity build coupled with quality of life skills. So for this you'll need the full Shogun Senator set, which includes the Senator helm, Senator mail, Senator braces, Senator coil and the Senator greaves. For your petalace, this is down to personal preference. When going through the game I advise the absolute petalace to give you that extra health, and then for your talisman, this is optional to be honest, this talisman. I would recommend, if you can, get a talisman with crit boost on it to take it, whether that's through the skills or the decoration slots, but to be honest, with this build, the talisman is purely optional. I'm using a talisman that has chain crit on it, but you can use something else if you so wish. Finally for the weapon, I'm using the Empress Regalia, which is the Rathian Insect Glaive. As always, if you're going through the game for the first time, this version of the Insect Glaive may not be at the level that I am shown in this video, but regardless you should still have similar results. As for the Rampage skill on it, you don't have much to go with, so I've simply gone for a Spirit Bird double. And then finally for your Kinsect, I personally say these are down to personal preference. So when it comes to the decorations, first of all I've gone for Tenderizer Jaws to max out Weakness Exploit. I've then gone for Critical Jaws to max out Crit Boost. And then Venom Jaws to max out Poison Attack. And finally a Brace Jaw, which is optional for a point in flinch free. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 390 raw attack with a poison rating of 39. You'll have a small sliver of purple sharpness, although this will be white sharpness if you have a lower version of the Rathian Insect Glaive. And you'll have a base affinity of 40%, which can be easily 90% when you take into account Weakness Exploit. You'll also have a decent defense of 701 that is strong against dragon and water, but unfortunately weak to the other elements, especially thunder. As for the switch skills, with the Insect Glaive, I say these are down to personal preference. Now when it comes to the skills, you have Critical Eye at level 7. Critical Eye is a skill that increases the base affinity of a build, allowing us to have that 40%. You'll then have Peak Performance at level 3, which is our primarily raw attack skill, which increases our raw attack so long as our health is full. You'll then have Crit Boost at level 3, increasing the damage of our critical attacks, but this only applies to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental or ailment portion. You'll then have Weakness Exploit at level 3, allowing our affinity to be increased by up to 50% when we're attacking monster weak points. You'll then have Poison Attack at level 3. Poison Attack is a skill that increases the poison rating and build-up of the ailment. Poison weapons, in my opinion, are very useful in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, as rarely is a monster completely immune to poison, and it allows us to put some unseen damage over time on an opponent. You'll then have Handicraft at level 3, allowing our weapon to have increased sharpness. You'll then have Marathon Runner at level 3, which is a skill that reduces constant stamina drain by a certain percentage. With the Insect Glaive, this applies to when we're sprinting or when we are airborne. You'll then have Pierce Up at level 3, which is a wasted skill on this build, but it's part of the armor. Pierce Up basically increases the damage of piercing ammunition or piercing arrows. It's a gunner skill. You'll then have Grinder S at level 3, which, when recovering sharpness, grants a boost to sharpness properties based on the number of levels recovered. You'll then have Flinch Free at level 1, negating minor knockbacks from monsters as well as our allies. And then finally you'll have Chain Crit at level 1, which is an optional skill and a result of the talisman we're using. You may not have this, you may have something else instead. Basically, continuously landed hits gradually increases the attack and elemental attack of your weapon. And as the Insect Glaive is already a fast hit weapon, this can be quite useful. So there we have it. As you can see, it's quite a straightforward build, definitely favouring affinity over other skills. But every build out there in Monster Hunter has various pros and cons. No build is absolutely perfect. When it comes to this Senator build, its biggest pro is its affinity. Having very high affinity, combined with crit boost, means that we can deal decent damage. On top of that, we also have access to other damage increasing sources, thanks to peak performance and poison attack, to increase and enhance our damage even further. And then finally is that this build is quite easy to craft. Shogun Senator is taken on quite early, and on top of that you don't even have to have an essential talisman for this build to work. But of course there are cons. One of the biggest cons for this weapon is unfortunately sharpness could be an issue. Even though we have Grinder S as one of our skills, we can burn through the purple and white sharpness quite quickly. And another con is unfortunately we are lacking in survival skills. We are instead relying on the Insect's Glaive ability to take to the air and avoid attacks that way. But should we take a hit, we may feel it with this build. But regardless, this is an excellent little budget build and I'd highly recommend it. It's fun to use, deals decent damage, and can take you through to the end of Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. But of course there is always more than one build out there. And for the next budget build, which is going to be a Rarity 9 budget build, we're again looking at another strong DPS build, but this time focuses more on raw attack than affinity. And for a more colourful name, I'm simply going to call it the Rathalos build. This build combines raw attack skills, affinity skills, and quality of life skills, giving you a very comfortable build to get you through the end of Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak story. So for this, you'll need the full Rathalos set, which includes the Rathalos Helm X, Mail X, Braces X, Coil X, and Greaves X. For your Petalace, I'm using the Absolute Petalace again, but this is down to personal preference. And then for your Talisman, you'll need a Talisman that has at least Weakness Exploit level 2 on it, whether that's through the skill actually being on the Talisman itself or via the decoration slots. Finally, for my weapon, I'm using the Lumen's Birch, which is the Gormagala Insect Glaive. This has an anti-species rampage decoration on it, and then again when it comes to your Kinsect, this is down to personal preference. So when it comes to the decorations, I've first gone for Tenderizer Jaws to max out Weakness Exploit, then gone for a Jumping Jaw, which is optional for some points in Evade Extender, Sharp Jaws to max out Protective Polish, Critical Jaws to max out Crit Boost, and then finally Grinder Jaws to max out Speed Sharpening. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a raw attack of 392 with a dragon rating of 30. You'll also have purple sharpness, although this could be white sharpness depending on the level of your Gormagala Insect Glaive, with a 20% base affinity, which can be 70% when you take into account Weakness Exploit, and you'll have a decent defense of 731 that is strong against fire, water and ice, but unfortunately weak to the other elements. As for the switch skills, once again they're down to personal preference. So when it comes to the skills, first of all you'll have Attack Boost at level 7. Attack Boost is a skill that increases the raw attack of a build, and at level 4 or above it gives us a percentage increase to that raw attack as well. You'll then have Earplugs at level 5, which is a byproduct of the armor we're wearing, but is a useful quality of life skill that negates all monster roars against our hunter, preventing us from losing control of a character when our monster roars. You'll then have Critical Boost at level 3, increasing the raw attack damage of our attacks when they crit a monster. You'll then have Weakness Exploit, increasing our affinity by up to 50% when we're attacking monster weak points. You'll then have Protective Polish at level 3. Protective Polish is the skill that whenever we sharpen our weapon, will put a protective coating over our sharpness gauge, preventing any sharpness loss for a small duration of time, helping us maintain that purple or white sharpness for longer. You'll then have Windproof at level 3, which again is another byproduct of the armor we're wearing, but is still a useful quality of life skill as it negates all wind effects on our hunter. You'll then have Part Breaker at level 3, a useful skill as it allows us to break monster body parts more easily, which can be useful for farming when you're going through the game for the first time, as breaking monster body parts can yield more materials. You'll then have Speed Sharpening at level 3, which is a useful skill especially when used in unison with Protective Polish, as it allows us to sharpen our weapon incredibly quickly, allowing us to put that protective coating from Protective Polish over our sharpness gauge even more effectively. You'll then have Evade Extender at level 2, which is kind of one of our quality of life skills and defensive skills in all honesty, as it allows us to dodge and hop and evade at greater distances. And then finally you'll have Slugger at level 1, which is a byproduct of the Talisman we're using. It's not really needed on this build. Slugger basically allows us to knock out monsters more easily when we're attacking their heads, which could be useful if we're using a blunt Kinsect. So there you have it. As you can see, it's again another straightforward full set budget build. Whilst again it has a lot of investment in DPS related skills, it nonetheless has quality of life skills to make hunts feel easier than they are. So when it comes to the pros and cons for this build, its biggest pro is its damage output. Having skills like Attack Boost, Crit Boost, Weakness Exploit and more, we're able to bring down monsters in a decent amount of time with this build. On top of that, this build has a ton of quality of life skills, including Earplugs, Windproof, Part Breaker and Evade Extender, that all will make a hunt feel potentially easier than it is. And then finally for the pros is that this build has decent sharpness management. with protected polish and speed sharpening, it means that we don't have to worry about our sharpness gauge getting super low or losing that purple or white sharpness status. But of course there are cons. One of the biggest cons for this build is unfortunately you need a talisman that is able to get that weakness exploit level 2 on it. And the other con, which isn't really that much of a big one as this build focuses on more raw attack than elemental damage, is that we are using the dragon element, and thus monsters who are resistant to the dragon element, this build won't deal the most amount of damage to. I mean, it will still be able to bring them down in a decent amount of time thanks to, like I said, we're focusing on raw attack over that elemental damage, but it's still something to be mindful of. But regardless, this is a very strong build and can definitely see you through to the end game of Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, and even take on the early afflicted monsters. It will definitely help when it comes to kickstarting your endgame mix sets. Now, as always, when it comes to these builds, there is always room for customization. These builds are not set in stone, so you can change them and edit them to what you personally fancy. You can swap out decorations or even armor pieces, which is one of the great things about Monster Hunter. So, what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you some 4-set budget builds, this time for the Insect Glaive in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.